Major developments out of the Middle East today and this coming week. The British government is expected to respond to Iran's seizure of a British oil tanker tomorrow with what it's calling diplomatic and economic measures. Britain said the response will be robust, but there's a mystery around the specifics. This as NBC News has obtained a dramatic audio recording of the moments before Iran's Revolutionary Guard took over that tanker in the Strait of Hormuz on Friday.
You obey, you will be safe. If you obey, you will be safe. Alter your course to 360 degrees immediately. Over. Foxtrot 236. This is Separ Navy patrol boat. No challenge is intended. No challenge is intended. I want to inspect the ship for security reason. Over.
You must not impair, impede, obstruct or hamper the passage of the MV Stena Imperio. Please confirm that you are not intending to violate international law by unlawfully attempting to board the MV Stena.
You heard the Iranian official there saying they're taking action for security purposes, and a British Navy officer appearing to warn him against seizing the tanker. This incident is another step in the renewed hostility between Iran and the West. Senior U.S. officials said that U.S. Marines jammed and destroyed an Iranian drone in the Gulf of Hormuz on Thursday, and that came after Iran shot down a U.S. drone, which almost led to President Trump ordering strikes on Iran. Meantime, U.S. officials say the Trump administration is considering ending a program that allows Iran to run a civilian nuclear program with international assistance. The civilian program is a key part of the 2015 Iran deal, which the U.S. pulled out of. But if this goes through, the whole deal could unravel. This is all happening while the U.S. has no permanent leader at the Pentagon. Acting Defense Secretary Mark Esper could get the job after a confirmation hearing on Tuesday. Counterterrorism is on the agenda when Pakistan's Prime Minister meets with President Trump on Monday. Lots to unpack here. Let's get to it with NBC News Tehran Bureau Chief Ali Arouzi in Tehran, and MSNBC National Security Analyst Evelyn Farkas and Foreign Policy Analyst Steve Clemens. Thank you all for joining me today. Ali, I want to start with you. What has been the reaction to that audio tape we heard? Has it made the tensions worse there?
Well, Philip, it's intensifying an already highly volatile situation, and it's also drawing in a lot of other players. The UK said that the British flag tanker was in Omani waters, and the Omanis, who've traditionally served as a sort of go-between between Iran and the United States, having good relations with both of them, support the British claim. They say that the tanker was 1 nautical mile inside Omani waters. Obviously, the Iranians refute that, saying it was in Iranian territorial waters. The Omanis also said that this was a clear action of tit for tat and nothing else. And also, after listening to the recording you just played, which was put out by a maritime security firm called Global Dryad, those exchanges are worrying. You hear between a British Navy frigate, the IRGC, and the oil tanker, just moments before it was seized, you can hear the Iranians say that they want to inspect the tanker. You can hear them telling the ship to change course, and they're telling them if you obey, you will be safe. Then the British frigate radios the oil tanker. It tells it to conduct its passage, that it's in international waters, and it mustn't be impaired, impeded, obstructed, or hampered. So these are all very tense moments. And then this morning, Iran's ambassador to the UK weighed in, saying that Iran's response will be firm and that they're ready for all scenarios. Iran's foreign minister blamed John Bolton for this, saying that he had put the British up to taking an Iranian supertanker last month, which led to the Iranians seizing this tanker. So it's a really very delicate situation, and any small miscalculation could lead to some serious problems.
Evelyn, what are your thoughts here? All the key players, Britain, the U.S., and Iran, they're all saying they're not going to back down. Where do you see relations going from here?
Yeah, it's really tense right now. The Iranians are trying to put the pressure on the Europeans, frankly speaking, to get us back to the negotiating table. President Trump has said that he's willing to negotiate with the Iranians, but it looks like his administration right now is more interested in keeping the pressure on Iran, the sanctions pressure, which is what Iran wants lifted because they need economic relief right now.
Steve, we know President Trump's stance on the Iran deal, but most of the Democrats who are running for president say they would rejoin the deal if they win. Politico has an article out now saying that that could be tricky since, among other reasons, parts of the agreement are set to expire. What does the U.S. need to do between now and Inauguration Day to allow for that deal to happen?
Well, I don't know what ultimately the president will do, but he's been sending some odd signals. First of all, he's allowed Rand Paul to negotiate directly with Javad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, and possibly open the door to a Trump deal with Iran. And they've begun to talk to each other through Twitter and other forums, saying that the additional protocols of the JCPOA, the Iran deal, could be moved forward if the United States to remove some of the sanctions that it has imposed on them. So both sides are playing chess with one another, and there's a precision in this reckless escalation. I agree totally with Ali that it's very, very dangerous. But you have a game going on right now where both sides are attempting to threaten the other with things that could really cripple them. And what I think we've seen in the Straits of Hormuz right now is the West's worst nightmare to some degree about a war with Iran and what that would do to global oil flow and the role of the Iranians there. And I think that right now, both sides are muscling up, and we may, I feel awkward saying this, but we may get to a condition where both sides are willing to actually talk to each other. I've always thought it wasn't the Iran deal that Donald Trump didn't really like because it was a deal with Iran. It wasn't the Trump deal with Iran. And I think that's right now what people are beginning to look at. Is there an opportunity to take what we have and create a different condition of it that Donald Trump can brand as his deal?
Do you think he just wants a more hands-on approach when it comes to that deal? We learned this week
I think he wants his name on it.
No, I can see that. We learned this week that the U.S. has begun reestablishing an air base inside Saudi Arabia. Hundreds of troops are now headed back to that base. Ali, I want to ask you, what do we know about the Prince Sultan Air Base? What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. For the first time in 15 years, the U.S. military began moving equipment and hundreds of troops back to that military base in Saudi Arabia because they say they needed to counter a threat from Iran. Now, the deployment will include some 500 troops as well as fighter jets and Patriot long-range missile defense systems. But that's already getting the Iranians very angry. Iran's foreign minister responded to that move, essentially accusing the U.S. Army of being a bunch of mercenaries hired by the Saudis to do their dirty work for them. He said the Saudis think that they can buy security and will try to resolve their problems by sacrificing every last U.S. soldier. But in real terms, if the U.S. does make that deployment, which they look like they're going to, it's going to create another flashpoint in this already very troubled region and could possibly open the door for another conflict by accident when there's so many U.S. troops and Iranian forces rummaging around in a very tight, crowded space. But also, interestingly about that deployment, it's not making people in the U.S. very comfortable either. The House is voting to block those arms sales to Saudi Arabia for various reasons of their malign activities that have gone on. They're not very comfortable with those sales, but it's probably going to be vetoed by the president and will probably go through.
As he looks to solidify that relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Evelyn, since you were a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Obama, I'd like you to weigh in on Mark Esper's nomination as Defense Secretary.
Sure, Richard. I worked actually with Mark when I worked in the Congress. He was in the House at the time. I was in the Senate. We went head-to-head on international security issues. He's a competent man. He knows all aspects of the military defense establishment, if you will, having worked in Congress, having worked in associations, international, or in the aviation association industry, and then in the corporate defense world. So he's very competent. He was Army Secretary, of course, as you know, up until this nomination. He understands how the Pentagon works. He knows how to get things done. He understands the international environment. So he's far more qualified than the previous acting secretary, and I think he's qualified in general and will do a good job. He will have a lot of pressure on